You know what those sounds mean, right? It means it's a brand new episode of Ghoulish with me, Max Booth, a host. And this week is a really exciting week because we, as in myself, Max Booth, a host, I go down under. It's a brand new episode of Ghoulish with a guest who lives in Australia. It's an Australian ghoulish. Some would argue the best type of ghoulish. I don't know who would be arguing that. Probably Australians. I'm not going to argue that because I am not Australian. Except I am in this episode and any other episodes where I speak to someone who lives in Australia. That is the law. And there's no reversing that. So thank you for listening to a brand new Australian Ghoulish. On today's episode of Ghoulish Australia, I am talking to Alan Baxter about spooky towns to promote, celebrate his new collection / novel, The Gulp. Did I say that in an Australian accent? No. Did I say it oddly? Yes. I cannot do accents. I refuse to try, except right now I will do my best Australian accent. Are you ready? Okay. This is my Australian accent. I hope you enjoyed it. I did not enjoy talking. I never enjoy talking. These intros make no sense. And the moment I open my mouth, I regret ever making a commitment to do a podcast about anything. But I already own a microphone and I've done 70 plus episodes. So what am I supposed to do? Stop now? I can't. Imagine the shame that would bring my family. All right. Well, I hope this intro was entertaining to you. I hope it brought you love and joy. I hope it passed the time. Now I'm going to stop talking and let you listen to me talk from the past, which is my conversation with Alan Baxter about spooky towns. So yeah, listen to that. Go pick up his book, The Gulp, and I don't know, live spooky. Die spooky. Those are things you could do. 2 options. You could choose one, do both of them, combine them. It's up to you, really. I definitely should have stopped talking 5 minutes ago. Okay, goodbye until next episode. See you after the noise effect, the little noise effect that I'm about to do after I cough. Now, why would I cough? I don't know. It's something I did way back in the beginning of the podcast, and now I have to because it's part of the show. Are you ready? All right. And that was the cough.
Because when Skype first started up, I just had Alan.Baxter for ages. But then there was some sort of fuck up and my password stopped working. When I tried to recover password and all that, nothing worked. So I ended up having to start over again with a new email address. And then when I put Alan.Baxter in, it said that already exists. I know. So I had to add .author on the end because I needed a different name.
That's really similar to why I have a suffix at the end of my name because two of me already exist, so I had to add one.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get to Google and there's a British what's the word architect. There's a British architect and an American football player who both share my name, and I get alerts for them from time to time.
Wow. Are they doing okay?
The football player seems to have dropped off again. He was doing really well for a while. Is it Pittsburgh Steelers? Is that right?
I don't know, man.
For, yeah, I think I don't know anything about American football, but I think that was the team, and he was all over the place, and then he just sort of disappeared. So I don't know if he quit. But the Alan Baxter architect in the UK is doing mad stuff. He's winning awards and making huge buildings and doing all sorts of stuff. He's a big name in architecture, it seems.
Wow. A proper building man is what I call that occupation.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. There's a guy named Max Boot, who's some type of politician. I don't know a lot about him, but sometimes online people get really mad at him and they misspell his name, or maybe there's an autocorrect thing going on, and they yell at Max Booth instead, and they tag me on Twitter and they yell at me for things I've said on the news that I did not say because I'm not allowed to go on the news. But I don't correct
Well,
them. Instead, I just fight with them until they realize who I am, and then I
you get support where you can, don't you?
yeah, I guess my thought is, maybe they might buy my book, but that doesn't happen.
Anything's worth a try. Yeah. I can't remember which one it was. We had a politician here who was just a real fuck. Well, I mean, they all are, but I can't remember which one it was. But there was some poor guy in the US with the same name, and he just started copping so much abuse. And he ended up just saying, celebrating it, and he's like, "I'm Twitter famous now. Yeah, I'm the Australian minister for this, that, and the other." And he just played. It was really cool. He was such a good sport.
Yeah, I can't imagine being named after somebody who also has my name. That would be awful. That's why I used to work at a hotel, and I checked in a guy who also was named Max Booth, and it was really odd. And
That's
we just looked at each other for a moment when I told him that was my name too. And then I leaned over the front desk and I said, look, by the time you check out tomorrow, only one of us will be leaving this building. And he did not take the joke as I intended, and he got quite creeped out and just went to his room and didn't say anything else to me.
Oh my god. Oh, you get a quiet guest that way at least.
Exactly. You also get a quiet guess by stabbing them in the eyeball, which you might know something about. Some eyeball play.
Yeah, nothing like a bit of eyeball play. We like that.
I have this book at my desk that I keep, which is just a list of alternative sexual things you could do to your partner, and every single chapter is called eyeball play.
Oh my god.
I'll send you a
I'm sure there's
copy.
a magicians out there.
Yeah, I mean, I did write it, and I only made one copy, but I read it often. I did you just say hello?
I just said I like it. I
Oh,
like it.
hello. Back to you.
I,
Hey. Let's talk about this book that you wrote. It is called The Gulp by you,
yeah.
Alan Baxter. This is a book that is kind of like a collection, but also kind of like a novel. I think maybe you invented this new way to tell stories. I don't think anyone has ever written a book quite like this, where every story takes place in the same town, and if you read them from front to back, it films almost like a novel narrative. How did you come up with this idea, Alan?
Um, I don't know that I'm the first to do it. Like the sort of the idea of a mosaic novel of sort of interconnected things. I don't know if anyone's done it before using one very specific location rather than just with characters or something. But I mean, it started really. It was my pandemic project because when all this shit went down and just the plague swept the planet, I had different projects on the go, but I couldn't really concentrate on a big full-length novel narrative in keep it in my brain, because suddenly there was COVID, my son was home, so we were homeschooling, and my day job is running a kung fu school, and I had to completely figure out how to reinvent that and do that by Zoom, and all sorts of shit went on. So I couldn't really concentrate on big stories. Plus, only a couple of months before, as a bit of a gag, really, I'd put out Veru, which was just this killer kangaroo novella that started mostly as a joke, thanks to Keelan Burke. Um, and that started doing really well. People were really enjoying it. And so I started thinking, well, maybe I should just write more sort of short or novella length stories that are really Australian. And I'd had this idea in mind for ages to make this weird, creepy harbour town, a bit like the harbour town where I live, only a lot more remote and more creepy and weird. And so I just thought, well, fuck it, I'm just going to write some of these stories. And as I started putting them together, I realized that I was also dealing with kind of a bigger narrative, and then potentially bigger even than this book, that would stretch, hopefully, if people like it, over another book or more. So yeah, it sort of grew organically, mostly from not being able to concentrate on a full-length novel.
Yeah, because I don't have it in front of me, but isn't the title on the product page, say, like Volume 1?
Yeah, it's called The Gulp, and there's a sort of a subheading which just says Tales from the Gulp #1 or Volume 1. And that's because when when I sort of first conceived of it, I kind of had these two particular stories in mind. And as I started thinking about it more, I thought, you know what, I could write lots of different stories in this place. And so by the time I put together the first collection, which is 5 stories, all of them sort of novella-ish length, they're all sort of, the shortest one is about, I think, 11,000 words, and the longest is like 22 or something like that. By the time I put those 5 together, in the process of it, I realized, there's more here. And if I do get to tell more, that'll be quite fun. So I kind of hinted at it by adding that subheading to let people know that, if you like this, let me know and I'll write some more. So it would be nice to have a few of these kind of novella collections, or at least another 1 or 2. And then potentially I could write some novel length stuff in the same setting, and, revisiting some of the characters and stuff too.
I mean, I think it's no surprise that in some reviews people have compared this town to Stephen King's Castle Rock. Was that something you had in mind as well?
In some ways it was. I mean, I loved it. I can't remember. I think maybe it was Steve Stredd who put a review and said Alan Baxter has found his Castle Rock, which is such a huge compliment in its own way. Yeah, I really love those sorts of things. I love the fact that Derry and Castle Rock sort of are revisited so often. I love the fact that so many of Ramsey Campbell's books take place around Liverpool, and that, this sort of, we have these authors who write with this specific place in mind. And again, because the Roo did so well and people were really keen for Australian stories, and, even a lot of American readers were saying how much they really enjoyed this sort of Australian weirdness that I'd had in mind, this weird harbour town, for so long. And it was like, well, I should do it then. And so it wasn't sort of deliberately trying to create sort of a Castle Rock of my own in a way, but I mean, that can't not be an influence, because, been reading stories like that for so long. And I did want to create my own sort of Australian weird town mythos that I could revisit and have this sort of place and these characters that I could come back to. So yeah, it wasn't sort of deliberate, but it was kind of unavoidable in its own way as soon as I started thinking about this place.
And you said you took a lot of inspiration from this fictional town, from the town you live in now. How is it similar? Just like the layout, or are we talking you got some creepy stuff going on?
Sort of a bit of everything. So I live, like, Australia obviously is fucking huge. It's a massive place, and I live on the south coast of New South Wales, about 2 hours south of Sydney. So the actual setting geographically of the Gulp is further south than that, because it's more remote. It's further from sort of Sydney and other big cities, and it's kind of a gestalt version of lots of different country towns and harbour towns that I've visited around. The actual sort of street layout, the harbour town where I live, you could almost lay a street map of that over the Gulp and they'd pretty much match up, because, why reinvent the wheel? I figured I'd just use the general sort of streets and layout and a few of the key parts pretty much match up with where I live, like the lighthouse and the position of the pubs and one of the parks and beaches and stuff like that. And I've just kind of inserted that into an entirely different geographical spot. But that's that. Oh, I was going to say that's where the similarity ends, because it's it talks about being in different places, and there's two cities either side of this small harbour town, which are both also fictional towns. So that whole sort of region is made up. There are a couple of characters and things that occur in the Gulp that are that I have sort of got the inspiration of those from my weird little harbour town. It's not fair to say that they're accurate. I've definitely kind of like inflated the weirdness of what went on, but there's a few little events and characters that crop up in the Gulp that are very much inspired by people that I see around town, and it's like, that fucker's got a story, man. You see people, there's something going on there, and so I basically just take that and turn the weirdness up to 11 and put it in the Gulp.
I think that's something a lot of writers do, is just like walk around town and just follow interesting people around and see what they do and take notes. Maybe like sneak into the house when they sleep. I don't know.
Yeah, watch them sleeping. Now, I've said that before about the only difference really between people who write and people that don't is everybody sees the same stuff. It's just that writers remember it and then turn it into stories, and people who don't write don't. They just forget about it again. I think we have this curse of just seeing stuff and sucking it in and just turning it into stories.
Yeah, like someone who doesn't write, they might see someone, say, in a restaurant, and they might get annoyed that, like, my eyeballs are being interrupted from not seeing anybody, and now I am seeing somebody. What an annoyance! But someone who does write, they might see somebody and go, what's going on with this guy?
Yeah. Or they'll take that annoyance out later on the page and go, kill that fucker in a weird way because they're annoying me at my dinner. So.
Yeah, I haven't done that.
No, I haven't done that either. I definitely never put people in books and kill them just because I didn't like them. That definitely never happens.
I've also never killed anybody in real life. I just want to put that out there.
Neither have I. No, no one would convict.
Now, is homicide a crime in Australia? I don't know.
Yeah, it is.
Cool.
I say unfortunately because it's, let's be honest. There's we all know some people who deserve it. No, but it is.
Oh yeah, name them.
Most of the current government.
Yeah, let's discuss our plan to destroy the government. Now, I have no questions at all, Alan. I got distracted by this random homicidal rant you just went on. It's really surprising.
I know. What have you brought out in me?
Yikes. Now, I imagine I've written books and short stories that have the same fictional setting, and something I've always regretted not doing from the beginning is keeping tabs, like an ongoing document of the kill tools I've mentioned and like what has happened on these certain dates in the timeline of this fictional town. But while doing the Gulp, did you do anything like that to keep track, especially as you go forward with possibly doing more collections with this setting?
Yeah, I did. I learned that lesson. I've written a few series as well. Like it first came up when I was writing the Alex Kane series, which is like this sort of dark urban fantasy trilogy that I wrote for HarperCollins in Australia. And realized that I really needed to keep track of a lot of characters and stuff that were going on. So I started developing this sort of method of doing that. And subsequently, I write a couple of series with David Wood. We co-write some sort of action adventure and monster stories. And because there was two of us working on it and an ongoing series, we really needed to keep an eye on what was happening and who was where and what. So we started developing sort of story Bibles for those series. And so now I tend to just sort of, as a matter of habit, really, I tend to do that all the time when I'm working. So even if I'm working on what I'm sure will be a standalone novel and I don't plan to revisit it, I still tend to have a document aside where I keep all the places and characters and a little snapshot of the description and any key things about them. And so as soon as I started working on the Gulp, as I was writing the first story, I started jotting that stuff down. And in terms of timing, at the moment, it's not too difficult to follow because the 5 stories in the Gulp pretty much cover 1 year. So it's you sort of season to season, you can more or less see how it sort of wraps around, and it's give or take a bit. It's about 1 year from the start of the first story to the end of the last, and that was a conscious decision to kind of keep hold of the sort of the order that things are occurring. And I think if I do get to write subsequent volumes, I think that's probably what I'll do is plan to basically each volume will be more or less a year in the life of the Gulp. Because with they're short stories, but they're novellas really. Some of them, up around 20,000 words. So they're kind of long stories and they're sort of spaced out. So I think it's going to be easier to keep a handle on things if I do it that way and have things spread over the course of a year. And the other thing, we suspend disbelief as much as we can. If you've got a weird town with loads of weird shit happening, you might be able to believe 4 or 5 weird things happening over the course of a year a lot more easily than over the course of a couple of weeks. You need people to not just abandon this completely fucking haunted weird place. Like nobody would live there if all of this occurred in the space of a month. There'd just be an exodus. But when you have a few months for things to settle down in between each weird event, you kind of, you can imagine the residents like, oh yeah, weird shit happens once in a while, but it's, it's all right most of the time. So
yeah, it's like, maybe that'll be the end of it.
Yeah, surely that's the last. But yeah,
it's like imagine getting kicked in the dick. Okay, if someone kicked you in the dick like every single day, you would probably leave the spot that you keep getting kicked in. Like maybe you would just walk away. But if it only happened like once a week, you would go, I mean, that's just a coincidence.
Yeah, 6 days it doesn't happen. Every once in a while I get kicked in the dick. Yeah, let's carry on.
I mean, I have thought that out quite a bit, so I'm glad you understood what I was going for with that comparison. That's really relatable, I'm sure.
Yeah. I mean, who hasn't been there?
I don't know. If you are listening to this podcast and you haven't been kicked in the crotch, right in.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of slightly biased, I guess, on that front because my day job, I teach martial arts. So since I was a kid, I've been involved in martial arts and fighting. So I may well have been kicked in all sorts of places a lot more than most people have. So
it's a little special martial arts name for kicking someone in the crotch. What do you call that?
Well, it kind of is, but it depends what type of kick you use. Because without the way we work with the sort of kung fu style that I do, the names relate to the action and the type of kick, so you can kind of deliver that way you like.
Okay. Do you think you could take down Joe Lansdale?
Funny, there was this conversation on Twitter the other day where I was joking around on some stuff and I ended up saying there can be only one, and Joe commented and we agreed we'd just stay on separate continents and then we never need to test it.
I think, yeah, that was on my tweet, wasn't it?
Was it on yours? Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
I tweeted something about... Oh, yeah, I was making fun of that dude who said that rivals will all in competition against each other. And I said, if I see someone walking down the street and I know they're right, we have to fight until one of us gives up.
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, my. That guy blew up his Twitter, didn't he? Far out.
We all say stupid things. Just listen to this podcast.
True enough.
I've been around Joe Lansdale a few times. I don't know. I think I could take him. He's not the young man he used to be.
You're going to play on age. Yeah, I've had conversations with Joe, but I've never actually met him. So I'd love to. I think he's great. I love his work, and he seems like such a great guy. But there's a handful of us that seem to be like career writers and career martial artists. It seems like there's a percentage of people that fall into that category. Joe Fabry's another one, and there's quite a few around. Bracken McLeod, I think, as well, has done quite a bit of martial arts over time. So
yeah, I think didn't Hillbill Lee fight in the UFC?
Who did?
Hillbill Lee, the writer of To Kill a Mockingbird.
Really?
Yeah, she did a mixed martial arts, I believe. She
I
killed
bet she
like
would have
8
kicked
people.
ass. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can believe it too. Yeah, it's the quiet ones. The thing, they don't seem to do too much, but then all of a sudden you find out they've got this dark history. So yeah, I believe it.
What's the creepiest town you've ever visited? Because this is a book about a creepy setting. What are some creepy
Mm.
settings you've gone to?
Oh man, I love creepy towns. There's there's so many around. See, I was born and grew up in the UK, in sort of southwest of London, until I was in my sort of mid 20s, and then I spent a few years just wandering around the planet with a guitar and a backpack, and ended up settling in Australia mostly because I met an Australian girl. We got together and stayed here. So I've sort of seen different types of creepy towns in lots of different ways. In Australia, uh, there seems to be, see, the industry in Australia kind of changes a lot. So you'll have a town that grew because there was fucking shale, and they were mining and making shale oil for like 100 years, and the whole town grew. And then the shale ran out, and they all went, oh well, okay, and they just left. And so you end up with this absolutely just abandoned sort of ghost town. And there's a few of those around for different reasons, and some of them, like the bushes, just literally come back, and you can just see a few broken walls and stuff here and there, and you're like, holy crap, there used to be a whole town here. Um, and then there's the outback towns that, because farming becomes more industrialized and stuff, so little farms get swallowed by big farms, and so where there used to be lots of small farms and people around, there's kind of one big farm, and all the people that lived there disappeared. So you get these kind of ghostly country towns that seem like hardly anyone's there, but then you realize actually there are still like 43 people living there, and otherwise all these broken down old houses and stuff. So all those abandoned or semi-abandoned places around Australia are amazing. Quite often we go on road trips, and I always try and find those. And growing up in England, there was the creepy villages. There's been a village for 1,500 years. Because England's just got this sort of long ass history. And then you find these sort of little villages. Have you seen the? Oh God, I'm having a mental blank. The Simon Pegg movie Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Hot Fuzz, and it seems like a completely normal, beautiful little English village, but it's just fucking weird. There's strange stuff going on because the people are a bit corrupted and weirded by it. And there are lots of places like that in the UK. There's lots of little villages that you're like, man, I can just imagine there's some cellar here with children being murdered. It's just that really appeals to me as well. Just that weird, eccentric English thing with this really polite and seemingly lovely front for who knows what might be going on in the background. So lots of little villages like that I've visited that are cool.
I've noticed a lot in movies and in books that there's this recurring theme of an island town being just the landscape of what seems to be a pretty normal type of village town, only for them to like fucking sacrifice somebody to some deity or something. I have always wondered what's going on with these island towns, and I don't know. Maybe it's just because they're just blocked away from all of civilization, so they get to come up with these strange ideas about how filming operates.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's why the setting for the Gulp really appealed. I love the thought of those towns that are isolated enough that it's a 20-30 minute drive in one direction or another to a big town or a bigger city or whatever else, but there's that little bit of space between those normal places and this little isolated town, so they just get to sort of things that would just freak normal people out are just normal for them. I love kind of that principle of isolation, and it doesn't take much, man. Like, you don't need a lot of space between one place and the next for attitudes and things to just be so different. It's weird. So you get one place that's got sort of no neighboring towns or suburbs all around it, even just for a short distance, and it just kind of grows its own brand of weirdness that is only apparent to people from outside. I think in some ways that's partly why I love weird Australian settings, because I was in my mid-20s before I got here, and I've been half my life as an Australian now. I'm completely familiar with the country, but I still look at it to some degree from an outsider's perspective, because I was born and grew up English, and so that's very much my kind of foundation. So when I look at Australia, even though it's completely familiar to me now, it's still also not, it's different to where I grew up. And so I think a lot of the time you find that immigrants have a really interesting perspective on a country, on where they live. They see things with slightly different eyes, because when you're just born and grow up somewhere, it's hard to sort of, which is why travel is so important. You obviously don't need to be an, you travel enough and you start to recognize different places, and then you can look at your own place with that sort of broadened view. But yeah, I think that's partly why I'm just so enamored with weird isolated Australian places, because nowhere does isolation quite like Australia, except maybe Alaska. Like there's 90% of our population lives on 10% of the landmass, mostly all around the edge, and the entire population would fit inside the M25 motorway in England. Like the entire population of metropolitan London, bigger than the entire population of this continent of Australia. So when it comes to distance,
yeah,
the numbers are insane. And so that's why things like, Wolf Creek and stuff like that are just so fucking terrifying. I've driven through the outback, and you wave at people when they come the other way, because you can drive for 4 hours on a straight road just staring at heat haze and see nothing but scrub and bush and kangaroos and maybe a herd of camels, because Australia has native camels.
I did not know about the camels. I've talked to a mutual friend, Glenn, many times about the strange wildlife in Australia. He has not mentioned camels once.
Well, there you go. We're the only country that actually has a wild camel population now, and because in places in the Middle East or whatever, they're all sort of farmed or owned or whatever. But because so much of Australia is desert, when people were first colonizing out here, a lot of people were like, this place is ripe for fucking camels, better than horses. So they imported a lot of camels, and then a lot of them ended up sort of running free or whatever and starting their own colonies. And the outback is just so huge, people couldn't keep track of all of them. And so when I was first driving through the Northern Territory, when I was in Australia, the first year I was here, and we were driving along this single lane highway and just for hours on end, and we saw this kind of dust cloud. Wow, what the fuck is that? And it looked quite big, and we assumed it was kangaroos or maybe emus running, because they tend to stir up the sand, this sort of red dust. And they were sort of going like almost perpendicular to the way we were driving, and we were getting closer and closer. We're like, that's too big. How can that possibly? What the hell are these animals? And we started freaking out a little bit, going, what? And then we're like, well, maybe it's horses or cattle, but they seem to be going too fast. And then as we got close enough, we saw it was a herd of like fucking 30 or 40 camels. I was like, what the hell is going on? We're not in Saudi Arabia. And so when we finally got to the next town, we asked about it, and they're like, oh, yeah, there's camels out there. There's loads of them. And that's where I learned that we're the only country that still has wild herds of camels. So
that's crazy.
Yeah,
I don't think I've ever seen a camel in real life. I don't know what I would do. I imagine I would scream.
They are fucking weird, man. They are, and you see them running en masse like that, and they're fast. It's maybe the follow up to the Roo should be the camel.
Speaking of the Roo, I am now haunted by this expectation of that I am going to write a book called The Dillo, because when you first put this book out, was it you? Well, maybe it was Keelan who was like, now we should continue it, and ongoing Riddles will donate all the proceeds to a charity. And I jokingly said, well, I'm from Texas, so it would have to be an armadillo. And then he made me a cover within like 10 minutes. And now, not a month goes by that someone doesn't ask me what's going on with the Dillo. And I did not intend on actually writing that, but I think I'm going to have to now.
Yeah, you're going to have to. Yeah, it was a weird thing, because, when it first came up, the whole thing came up because of this mock cover with I'm pretty sure it was Keelan and Charles were first talking about it. Anyway, that sort of came up. So subsequently, after the Roo came out and everybody was sort of enjoying it so much, people were like, oh, we should all do one of these. People should do one for their regions. And started hassling Keelan about it. Of course, the poor guy's busy enough as it is. And he was like, look, I'll tell you what, I'm happy to do a handful more covers, but only if the stories you write, any proceeds, any royalties go to animal charities. And I'll do a few more covers until I'm just sort of had enough with it. And a few people sort of jumped on. You mentioned that and mugged yourself. But then there's a couple more, like James Sabater wrote The Cassowary. I think that one came out. And Stephanie Rebick wrote, the Possum one. So I know there's those two that they did put out. You did talk about the Dillo. I think there was a couple more as well. I can't remember offhand what was what. But yeah. So yeah, it's engraved on your soul. You have to write the Dillo at some point.
It's become an ongoing joke in my household now because, like, someone will bring it up at the most random time. Like, not too long ago, someone tagged us in this YouTube video where they were talking about some of my writing. So my wife and I were like, let's put this on. And, like, till the end, he randomly said, and now we're just waiting on the Dillo. She could not stop laughing. This fucking joke response I did is now gonna haunt me to my grave until I write it. I'm gonna.
It will haunt.
I guess I need to. The Dillo.
Yeah.
It'll happen eventually. Not right now because I'm talking to you on this podcast.
True enough.
Yeah.
Which is more important.
But what you were saying though about like growing up in the UK and then moving to Australia in your 20s, it makes a lot of sense because I mean, if you grow up in a place, you just get used to how it is. I mean, I grew up in Indiana, and that is a state where everybody is constantly rude to everybody else. And if you look at somebody and they just tell you, fuck off, because it's really close to Chicago, where I grew up, like at the tip of Indiana. But when I was 18, I moved by myself to Texas, and everybody is still rude, but a different type of rude. It's a polite rudeness. Will they smile and say things that don't make sense to you, but they're really telling you to go get fucked? Like in Texas, when you want to tell someone off, you smile and you say, oh, bless your heart. That is like the realest thing to say to somebody in Texas. And I wouldn't have noticed how strange a lot of the Southern behavior is if I had grown up here. But moving once I was 18, it really hit me just how strange a new location can be.
Yeah, I've heard the bless your heart thing before as being just like this cutting, it's like the harshest thing you can say to someone. And it's like, yeah, I've come across that a little bit. And I was, a long time ago, I was at I can't remember which convention it was now. Anyway, Mary Robinette Kowal was a guest. It was a guest there as well, and I remember talking to her, and she's got this great sort of Southern history going on, and I learned all from her, all about this just weirdly sweet, smiley, fucking horror that you can go through. These people are cutting and so mean and cruel to each other, and it just sounds so beautiful, especially with a voice like hers, and she turns up the Southern accent. It sounds so sweet, but being so goddamn mean, it's like, wow, that's cool. I kind of like it.
Yeah, like that type of Southern accent is really much like the most beautiful cake you could ever possibly bake, but it's filled with like arsenic inside. Okay, we're about running out of time on this episode. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about the Gulp or about spooky towns at all?
Not really. In terms of the Gulp, buy it and read it. I hope you enjoy it. And in terms of spooky towns, go and visit them and sit around and pay attention. One of the things I like to do the most is just like hang out front of a cafe and with a coffee, or sit in a park while my son's like playing on play equipment. Just sit and watch, because yeah, I think that's where stories like this grow from. It's just sitting and watching the stuff people do, and you're like, that's just, when you stop and think about it, you're like, that's fucking mental. And you only notice it more in small country towns where people's weirdness is not recognized as such.
Yeah, absolutely. I can recall like driving across the state of Texas. Texas and Australia have a few things in common, I think, just as far as how big both places are. Like I live in central Texas, and if I want to leave the state, I begin driving, and it'll take a good 10 fucking hours before I reach the state line in just like the closest direction. It's really strange, but like you can drive in a straight line and you just see the same thing for so damn long. And
Yeah.
You always see these small little gas stations advertising the best barbecue in the state, and there's always some guy with like overalls on, sitting in a rocking chair, softly strumming an acoustic guitar. I mean, stereotypes exist because, well, they're true sometimes.
Well, it's true. When I was first in Australia, so I was traveling for a long time, and I went through sort of Southeast Asia, just doing the backpacking thing. And I arrived in Australia right in the north in Darwin. And the first thing we did was we travelled down through the middle down to Alice Springs and Uluru and all that stuff, and then back up and going across. In fact, when I was traveling, it was me and a friend of mine, and we travelled with a German brother and sister called Torsten Mon. So yeah, if you recognize that story, that's where their name is. There's no other similarities at all, but I use their names in the Gulp because that made. We met them in Darwin, and we all travelled together for a few weeks. It was cool. But talking of stereotypes, when we left Darwin and we were going down through the Northern Territory, we were in the middle of fucking nowhere, and we got to this little town. I think it might have been Tennant Creek or Daly Waters or somewhere like that. And there was this one sort of roadhouse motel hotel thing. We were sharing a camper van, and we got to sort of park out the back there overnight. And we were in the pub, and it was really quiet. There were like two or three other people in the pub, and we were having a drink and a chat. And suddenly there's all this yahooing and stuff, and this ute pulled up out the front, full of about 6 or 8 guys, all with the broad brim Akubra hats and the check shirts, and they just looked like absolute stereotypes. And they came in with these broad accents, and they were like, these are beers and all that, and they all just started carousing and stuff. And then they got absolute. We all got very drunk that night. They were great fun. They found out that we were English and German, and that was the best thing they'd ever seen because we were in the middle of fucking nowhere. And then they all piled back in the ute and said, "Oh, look, we better go. We've got work at 6 in the morning." And this was 2 in the morning. And we were like, right, fucking hell, I hope you haven't got a long drive. And they were like, we should make it back in time. And it's like, that's how far they had to drive drunk, and they just stay up all night. They get that drunk and then just drive back across the bush to get back to the sheep station where they work. And it's like, they're hoping they can make it in 4 hours before they're supposed to start work. They've just been up drinking. It's like, wow, fucking hell. When it comes to stereotypes, it's like you think Crocodile Dundee is a stereotype, and then you meet guys like this, and you're like, well, shit, okay. So, yeah, so it exists.
Before we go, I have to ask one last question. This is something I brought up with Glenn when I was talking to him on some podcast, and I was baffled that he had never heard of this movie, which in my head is like the one of the best Australian movies I've ever seen. Do you know Wake and Fright?
Oh yes.
How the fuck doesn't Glenn know about this movie?
That is fucking weird, actually. I knew about Wake and Fright in England before I got to Australia. There's a handful of Australian movies that are real sort of almost cult classics in England. Wake and Fright was one of them, and I had no idea how sort of accurate to small outback town life that movie was until I got here and went to small outback town and was like, wow, okay, that's not such a stretch after all. So yeah. No, that's a great movie. Wake and Fright is probably Lake Mungo is a more modern one. That's just an absolutely a sort of outstanding movie that really captures something about Australia. And Wolf Creek as well is another one that really captures Australia as place and stuff like that. But yeah, Wake and Fright by far was the first one of that sort of movie that I'd ever seen, and was like, well, that's mad. And they've definitely got some, or had some, like, influence on me since I got to Australia and started writing about Australia over the last sort of 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had like, it might have just been because both were Australia, but as I was reading the Gulp, I kept thinking of Wake and Fright. But I think it's just because you nailed that small town feeling, like the movie also does.
Yeah, exactly that, and that's what I love. I love exploring that whole dynamic of that small town sort of weirdness and stuff that goes on. And the town in Wake and Fright is an outback town, and the Gulp is a harbour town. So geographically, they've got that sort of difference about them, but they're both isolated Australian towns, and it's that Australian sort of isolation vibe that I just find so cool and so fascinating. And yeah, that's why I wanted to create this town and see if I can revisit it over time. So Yeah, I can't believe Glenn hasn't seen Waking Fright. That's nuts. God, the guy's an Australian horror fan, and he's massive in Australian horror, and he didn't know that movie. That's incredible. I guess maybe he's young enough.
I'm younger than he is, so he has no excuse.
Oh, well, there you go then. So you're right. No, he has no excuse at all.
I was just blown away. I mean, this was over a year and a half ago, and I'm still just shocked by it. So I had to bring it up with you to make sure that it was just him, and like somehow the actual country of Australia doesn't know about this movie, which would have been the strangest fucking thing.
Well, having said that, I mean, like I said, I learned about it in the UK and knew it when I got here. Well,
Yeah.
I've talked to plenty of other people actually that know that movie. I'm going to give Glenn some shit after we stop talking about the fact that he hasn't seen the movie. I'm going to check and make sure he's seen it now.
I hope so. Well, what if he's like, oh, I have seen it, and maybe I just dreamed this conversation, but I don't think I did, because it was on a podcast, so I can go back and listen to it. Anyway, how can folks find you online?
The easiest way is to find my website, because everything's linked from there. So Alan Baxter, alanbaxter.com.au. And everything's there. There's links to my socials. I'm most active on Twitter, just at Alan Baxter. You can find me there most of the time. I really enjoy Twitter. But yeah, if anything you need to know, you'll find it at my website or from there.
Sweet. Now, before we go, can you say the most Australian expression that comes to mind?
We're not here to fuck spiders, mate.
Thank you for listening to Ghoulish. If you like what you just listened to, hey, go review us on iTunes. And go buy the books we publish at perpetualpublishing.com. And hey, why not also go support us on Patreon at patreon.com/PMM Publishing. I don't know what else to say. I'm going to end this right now. Goodbye.
Live spooky, die spooky.